Welcome to all. Um Good morning to those joining us from Mexico. We're glad to have you with us, Dr. Louise Noelle Gras. An honor to have you presenting on Louis Barragan's work, whom we respect here in India. This is the 14th edition of the Council of Architecture India COA Social Reads Forum. And we place on record our thanks to the President, Mr. Habib Khan, the Vice President, and the entire Council for consistently supporting this forum through the last 2 years, through the pandemic. And the primary objective of this forum is to encourage a culture and ethos of immersive practice and critical thinking. And hence, we're honored to have Dr. Louise Noelle, who's been known for her seminal research and writings and into the philosophy and projects of architect Louis Barragan. We're joined today by architects, universities from India, Southeast Asia, and even a few from South Africa. Peter Rich has joined us from South Africa, Mirto from Paris. So it's really we have guests from across the planet almost for this talk. And participants may post their questions in the chat box, and we shall attempt to respond to as many as possible. So let me begin with an introduction of Dr. Louise Noelle Gras, who doesn't need an introduction. Dr. Louise Noelle Gras is an acclaimed scholar and has been involved in many initiatives on architectural history and criticism across the world. And she being a founder and a co-founder and director of the International Committee of Architectural Critics, the CICA. Dr. Louise Noelle is a senior scholar at the Institute of Aesthetic Research or Investigations of the National Autonomous University of Mexico since 1982. She has been active in the field of protection of 20th century architectural heritage, which is more so under threat in our times now. And as a member of ICOMOS, as well as a president of DOCOMOMO-Mexico, Dr. Louise Noelle has been a member of the Academy of Arts in 1991 as well. She was awarded the Jean Chaumy Prize of the International Union of Architects in 2011 and lectures in universities in Mexico and across the world. She has contributed to numerous architectural journals and is the author of significant books on Mexican and Latin American 20th century architecture. Significant amongst them, I've translated the titles: Contemporary Architecture of Mexico in 1989, Louis Barragan, A Search and Creativity in 1996. I hope my translations are more or less in line with the Spanish book, and several other seminal books. And the theme for today, most appropriate in a world which is gripped with the techno-economical forces of architecture, Louis Barragan, A Search for Emotional Architecture. I'll briefly read an abstract that we received from Dr. Noelle in this regard. Louis Barragan enjoys a significant international fame and is a unique case in Mexico's architectural field. Many books and articles have been published describing the works of this creator. In his acceptance speech, Barragan stated, "My architecture is autobiographical." And it is with this motive that this presentation offers a survey to analyze and uncover a leading thread of his creativity and his search towards an emotional in architecture. Likewise, it intends to rescue his image, not only on the basis of the known graphic documents, but focusing on his achievements throughout his life in order to appreciate them with contemporary criteria. Do join us, and we invite Dr. Louise Noelle Gras to begin her presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I must say good evening to that part of the world, the other side, I might say, of the world. I'm really honored to have been invited by the Council of Architecture Forum, and especially by Professor Durganand Balsavar, that reminds me of several times that I've been in India, and how architecture has really no boundaries, and there are so many communications, and I will try today to put forward some of them. I guess you're all seeing my screen that I'm sharing, and I change slightly the title of the presentation, which is absolutely the same. I put a poetic search, or it has to do also with emotional architecture. It really has to do with this part of architecture that Professor Balsavar put so well in his words, that we're losing. Architecture is becoming too much an economic idea, a fame idea, and the real work of an architect towards the feelings, towards the well-being, towards the people that inhabits it, it's sometimes passed over. So with this in mind, I will go to Luis Barragán and try to follow his life and how all what he received through his life finally became just a part of his architecture. He was born in 1902 in Guadalajara, city, the second largest city of Mexico, in the northwest part of Mexico City, and died in 1988 in Mexico City. He studied civil engineering. He didn't study architecture for a very simple fact, for the fact that there was no school of architecture in his hometown. So he studied civil engineering, and in a sense that freed him of an academic load. Many of contemporary architects born at just the beginning of the century went to the Beaux-Arts way of studying, and it was much more difficult for them to enter modernity. Barragán didn't. Barragán was just somebody that was very much interested in architecture and entered through it with the idea of, yes, the poetics of it, but also just the way of building it and achieving what he wanted to achieve. He also, as many youngsters of the time, was a pilot. In 1924, he finished his architectural studies, or his engineering studies. And at that time, he started, like many students, when they finished, they did the tour. They went to Europe, and he went to Europe, and he started in, sorry. For him, the influences of Mexico, where he was born and where he lived, were very important. And if you read, because I sent his discourse when he received the Pritzker Prize, at that time he said that his hometown, Mazamitla, was very important for him. Vernacular architecture. And this is the town of Mazamitla, a very simple town. That's the town next to the ranch where he would live in Guadalajara, but his parents had a ranch near this little town. And this town, the simple things, certain colorings, certain materials were very important to him. Also, of course, the important architecture of Mexico at the time. On one hand, the pre-Hispanic architecture, the enormous power of local architecture that the Spaniards found 700 years ago. This is a Maya site of Palenque, where what impressed him was mainly the outside of this architecture, because interior spaces were very small, stairs, slopes, the way all these work within nature. Also for him, the architecture that the Spaniards brought about, mainly the 16th century architecture, very powerful, heavy, with strong walls, was also a very important mark on his early years before, like I said, going to Europe. And he arrived to Spain in 1924. And here he is in El Generalife in Granada, La Alhambra, the Alhambra. Here he is, and standing in here. This is El Generalife, the part of the gardens with the fountain in the middle, and this column is this column. Here he is, standing there, and it impressed him very much. The architecture of the south of Spain, of Andalusia, and Andalus part, the part of Spain where the Islamic and the Spanish traditions mingle gently, was something that really was very powerful for him. For that, the Alhambra, Seville, I don't know why this image keep turning around. At that time, he kept traveling. He went to Italy. Here is a drawing by him of Assisi, of San Lorenzo in Assisi. He also visited, of course, many other places like Florence. And finally, at the end of 1924, he arrived to Paris. By April, and he stayed there for quite a while, by April 1925, the important exhibition of what we call nowadays the Art Deco did open, and he stayed for it, he visited it, and he said that Art Deco, these decorations on top of this modern architecture that was already growing at that time, wasn't really the solution. He was very much impressed by, of course, the Esprit Nouveau pavilion by Le Corbusier. This, the modernity, what all this brought about, the idea of the building on pilotis, the large spaces, the clean spaces, the large windows, all that really impressed him. And of course, pavilions like the Russian pavilion or the USSR pavilion by Yakov Menlikov, this constructivist architect. Again, the large glasses, the modernity of it, and the interior of the Austrian pavilion by Frederick Gisler called Cité dans l'Espace, that is a three-dimensional expression of neoplasticism that has to do with, in architecture, like the Rietveld Schroeder house in the Netherlands. He came back to Mexico, bringing also two books that were just coming about at that time. On one hand, he brought as presents to his colleagues with whom he had studied architecture, he brought about Les Jardins Enchantés, which is the Enchanted Gardens. And one would think, and people would say at a certain time, this was a book about gardening. No, nothing. It's a romance story taken out of the 1001, the stories of the 1001 Nights. And it's a story, a romantic story that evolves in gardens. And the gardens are depicted in the story, and there are 36 gardens in colors that the author designed. Some gardens are real, some are imaginary. These are some of the images of the book that resounded in Barragán, that had just been in Andalusia, that he had visited some of these gardens or similar kind of gardens. And for him, this was an inspiration, mainly also for another book that did come out at exactly 1925 also. Those two books are from 1925, called Le Colombier. Le Colombier is a state in the south of France where Ferdinand Bach did the gardens and some arrangements in a villa that was built there. And it's important because this is the villa, the drawing of the villa by Ferdinand Bach. And this is the actual villa a few years, well, photographed at the beginning of the 21st century. And the important thing of this is that Ferdinand Bach there has an interesting text where he says that the future of architecture should be inspired by Mediterranean architecture. Okay, at that time, one should go back and think what was going on in 1925. Nobody really knew where architecture was going from. On one hand, in 1925, academic architecture was still taught in the schools, and people thought that was the future. Some other people thought, of course, no, the future is what's starting in the Bauhaus, what Le Corbusier is putting about, what the constructivist is doing. But that was very little. Most of the clients were not for that. And the idea of having this Mediterranean architecture, this going back, but not going back to Gothic or some other grand architecture, no, going back to the basics of Mediterranean architecture that had all the relation of the north and the south of the Mediterranean, of the European and the Islamic part below, and the richness of all this. And this really impressed Barragán, and we will see in the first part of his work in Mexico, this evolving. I just want to show you that this is a drawing in the book by Ferdinand Bach, and this is what in 1931, Le Corbusier, in a second trip of Europe, drew of the place when he visited the place, because he went to visit the place then in 1921. So this is just to really show that this, the thought of this Ferdinand Bach, that was not an architect, was somebody that designed landscape and that did projects with certain type of houses, was something important for him. of course, we can see the relation in this image with, again, El Generalife in the Alhambra in Granada. He comes back to Mexico at that time in 1925, where neocolonial is booming in Mexico as neocolonial is booming in India. I just put here one example, but it's exactly the same year that the Delhi, the New Delhi buildings are being built. And it's what many architects and many clients were going for. He comes to Guadalajara and starts talking with his friends. He had 3 very good friends in Guadalajara that they all studied together, and they all got together wondering what kind of architecture should we do? It's important. At that time, really, nobody knew where to go, what to do. And he starts talking to them. They read the books. He brought books for his friends, and they start evolving a local architecture with some kind of neo-colonial or Mexican architecture. It's a very particular style. One of his friends is Ignacio Diaz Morales. This is a house for a doctor, a medical doctor. And you can see there the inspiration of the Alhambra with the small channels for water. This is the front of the house. This is the backyard. And we have all those reminiscence, this type of finishings in the walls. Of course, still keeping tile for the ceilings, many of the local way of building. The other one is Rafael Ursúa. This is the house before being, I think, clean and refurbished. Too much for my taste, but a very interesting house. And Pedro Castellanos, again, another type of this house with the type of the tiles for the roof in a green color that is the color, the natural color the tiles come out in the state of Jalisco in Guadalajara, where they were all living. And this is the inspiration where Barragán would go at the time. Some of the drawings of Ferdinand Bach, of course, all his baggage from all his trip to Europe, all the inspiration mainly from the Andalusia, the south of Spain. And one of the first houses he built is the González Luna house. Here we see it in the state it was, that I think it should have been clean and not completely arranged, but this is another conversation. But this is the house, trying to go for the height, the stairs, keeping arches. What for me is interesting is, like, at the entrance, the water is there. The water will be something important for him, as it is for Islamic architecture. And the door, if we see the design of the door, it has all that inspiration from south of Spain, north of Africa. Again, we can see, like, these windows in the dining room are like the windows of the Alhambra modernized square. And I put these 2 images because these are lamps that he designed at the time. The normal lamps that you would find in the market were not suited for this new idea of houses that he had. He put a roof terrace, that was important. Roof terrace, Corbusier, that was a must. So at that time, you see that all these influences start coming to him, but like in different places at different moments, and not all like it would get to a time that will all become one main language. This is a kiosk. We will see it from below. The door and this main kiosk that is really a vernacular architecture. At this point, this way of building is exactly the way of building in any small town around Guadalajara. So all this was there. The trip to Europe, Corbusier, the local architecture, the big walls, Ferdinand Bach, and it all kept coming back in very interesting buildings. This is, again, another house with this kind of tower that is really the place where the water depots are put up there. The arches, the gardens for him become very important. And if you read in his discourse, he talks about the mystery of garden, the peace that gardens would bring, all that. I think it's there. And this is a garden that has a door. It doesn't need a door. You don't need a door to go to your own garden, but it's just an imaginary way of composing all that he has with him. Again, certain features of past architectures. Another house, the Ildefonso house. He had a big amount of houses at the time in Guadalajara. And by 1931, again, he takes a new trip. He goes to New York in 1939. There, he meets with two important people. One, the big painter, muralist from Mexico that lived for 3 years in New York, Jose Clemente Orozco. Orozco that was painting this type of houses, reminding him of his place of birth, because Jose Clemente Orozco was also born in Guadalajara. So they were both from the same city, from the same surroundings, but they met in New York because by the time Jose Clemente Orozco was 15, 16 years old, Jose Clemente Orozco was not living anymore in Guadalajara, so they only met in New York, and they became very good friends. And you will see the evolving of this. There he also met Frederick Kiesler, the one of the Cité in Espace that he had visited in 1925, the pavilion, the Austrian pavilion, that was doing these ideas in maquettes of the endless house, these places that have a huge space with small subdivisions, but it kept the wholeness in it, the endless. It doesn't end. It just keeps going from one place to another. At that time, he also visited the editor of the Architectural Record. And he was a very intelligent person. He brought with him the photographs of the houses, the main houses he had done in Guadalajara. And the editor of the Architectural Record published them in 1931. And it says, recent work of a Mexican architect, Luis Barragán. And this is the house of the family of Barragán that had this look, and how he changed it for a more modern. This is for me already modern, even if it keeps some tiles and some things, it's modern. But again, Barragán has already an idea of being local. Why? Because, come on, if the photographer that came here to take the photo couldn't wait for this person to pass, it's kind of strange. When we take a photo, we always wait for people to move away. And it's a person that is dressed exactly like the people of the area dress, meaning this, giving a localization of this very modern house. 1931, like we also saw, he went to Europe. Of course, he went to visit, like I said, Le Colombier, and met Ferdinand Bach and became a good friend of Ferdinand Bach. But at that time, he also met Le Corbusier. Le Corbusier, everybody was after Le Corbusier, always. In many places, architects just flocked. But he met in 1931 Le Corbusier very closely through this person, Carlos Beistegui. Carlos Beistegui was a very rich Mexican person that lived in Paris and had just finished his roof garden, his toit terrasse, with Le Corbusier. And this is the image of the toit terrasse of Carlos Beistegui. It's in the books of Corbusier. Barragán knew Carlos Beistegui. All this is part of long-time research. There's a letter from Barragán to his mother that's been published, where he tells his mother, oh, tomorrow I'll go and have lunch at Mr. Carlos Beistegui house, and I'll give him your regards. And for this, he met Le Corbusier, and he became a close relation with Le Corbusier. And I say that not only because I imagine, I say that because there are copies of these letters in Barragán archive in Mexico. Sorry for the image, but there, before, people will write a letter and will have a copy, those kind of a very thin paper copy. So this is a thin paper copy of Jeanneret, Le Corbusier, given to him to go and see Madame Savoy at Poissy. And it says, Chère Madame, dear Madame, here is Mr. Barragán, a young architect from Mexico. Please let him see the house, Le Corbusier, and the drawing to get to the house, to visit the house. This tells me they were very close because Corbusier was not an easy person, we all know, and Le Corbusier will not bother his clients to open the door for a young Mexican architect just like that. They had to be really close. And there are 3 letters to 3 honors. The other one is from Madame Laroche Jeanneret. And the third one, I don't remember right now for which lady he wrote saying, please let this architect come in and look at the house. And of course, the influence of Le Corbusier will be also there now, much more important, like the one of Ferdinand Bach that he had just visited with him, with Bach, the house. At that time, the idea of Barragán was also to go and visit the Bauhaus, the other big beacon of modernity. He couldn't. Why? Because it's exactly the time that Bauhaus closed its doors because of Nazism was growing, and Bauhaus closed its door exactly in 1931. So he never really went here where he wanted, but later on he became a very good friend with Joseph Albers. Joseph Albers that had this type of studies in his book, and I will get back to this. And this is a letter to Joseph Albers from Luis Barragán, thanking him for giving him a painting with some of his squares. So again, we know Joseph Albers, one of the main members of the Bauhaus, became a good friend of Barragán. And this is important because normally one would say, no, Barragán will use colors and will use the colors from Mexico. No, Barragán was very much interested in color. That's why he became close friend with Albers that would travel to Mexico. And also it's important because Joseph Albers was the big theoretician of color of the 20th century with his big book, The Theory on Color. So one can say color in Barragán is not just, oh, vernacular, oh yes, Mexican. No, it's deeper than that. And when one thinks of an architect, one cannot go just with superficial things. We have to study, to look into it. And when one sees the richness of all this first part of Barragán life, one can understand the richness of the architecture he finally put forward. He comes back to Guadalajara in 1932, and he does this type of houses. Of course, the Toit Terrace of Le Corbusier is in the Toit Terrace of the Harper de Garibi house, or he builds a house for Jose Clemente Orozco that came back to Mexico and stayed for 4 years in Guadalajara. This is like you can see now, he's still keeping with some ideas of Mediterranean, the wideness, certain things, but modernity is starting to settle in. He also, with his brother that also studied engineering, did a park, and this is part of the park refurbished nowadays. I won't stop much into it, but we can start seeing some of the colors. In 1936, he decides Guadalajara is too small for him. The clients are not interested in modern architecture, and he's interested in modern architecture, and he moves to Mexico City, where architects like Jose Villagrán Garcia, that we consider the father of Mexican modern architecture, due to his architecture and the theory he evolved on modern architecture. This is a sanatorium from 1921, or the houses that Juan O'Gorman did in 1930-32 for Diego Rivera and his wife, Frida Kahlo. The modernity of these houses, this was what was interesting Barragán, and he decided to move to Mexico City, where the clients, where the people would accept a much more modern architecture. One of his first buildings in Mexico was this duplex house. It's built in a lot for one house, but he managed to do two houses together, like in a mirror, you know, looking at each other, the doors. A very interesting house. He started doing many houses and buildings, but many, like 40. In this very Le Corbusian style, you can see the Toit Terrace, very clear, big windows, horizontal windows, clean fronts. On pilotis, it's very clear how they go all the way up. The whole Le Corbusian credo, it's in here. And he does buildings and houses mainly for rent. Like here in a new section of the city, Cuauhtemoc section, he did apartment buildings. This is one, this is another. You can see the Toit Terrace, you can see the horizontal windows, you can see how the building goes on the pilotis, and a house. This is the house of the owner of this building. He did this type of buildings. Here are two others. He, like I said, he did many of these buildings. Here is another one. Of course, they are on pilotis, but the below part of the piloti is not left like in Villa Savoie open. No, here it's either commerce or garage, but the elongated windows, the Toit Terrace, and the one that I find most interesting there in north, orientated to the north, which is good for painters. He did 4 apartments for artists or painters with the big window that Le Corbusier had done for the Peintres aux Enfants. He does a Toit Terrace, that's important. And here is the refurbished building. And this is the plan, but mainly the interior, how they're the double heights, because it's an artist cannot paint or sculpt with the ceiling low. That Le Corbusier also went for low ceilings, but not for studio. Studio, he went higher. So these are the interior of these apartments. I'm very happy they were kept, they were refurbished, and they're still there. Important artists from Mexico lived there at the time. And this is important. This is a section of this Cuauhtemoc area, and you see the buildings by main Mexican architects. Here is Barragán and the four studios for artists. Here is Augusto Álvarez, a very modern architecture at the time, with Juan Sordo Madaleno, and this is Enrique del Moral, one of the designers of the master plan of the University City in Mexico. You can see they're all the same height, all the same language. This is modern movement in Mexico around 1938, 1940. And that's what interested Barragán at that time. He also did the house and atelier for José Clemente Orozco, now in Mexico City. José Clemente Orozco had moved to Mexico City. The low part is the house, the upper part, again, a studio with the big window. Of course, we see the inspiration of Le Corbusier. But that was not really what Barragán was looking. And in 1942, he decided he was not going to keep doing architecture. He told his clients, I'm not doing projects anymore. I am going to do gardens, to buy land, to do the garden, and he started doing several gardens. He had the inspiration at the time of Giorgio de Chirico with this type of things. He did in Tacubaya, he bought 4 lots. He did the gardens. This is one of the gardens. In one of these lots, later on, he would do his house. Here is a publication of the gardens. Here is a drawing or aquarelle by Barragán of this garden. And by 1945-50, this major change with the section or this enlargement of the city called Jardines del Pedregal de San Ángel, where he will build the parks, where he will look for a new expression in gardening, in landscape, keeping what was important of this place. In this place, there had been, in the year, around the year 0 or the year 100, an eruption of a volcano. So the rocks were still apparent. So he will try to keep the spirit of the place, what belonged to the place, and to build the walls with the same type of rock, and using not elegant flowers, just the normal flowers, even the flowers that will normally grow in those spaces, and do this type. This is one of the parks. In El Pedregal de San Ángel, he did 2 parks. He also did the garden. It was like a show garden, how you could build a garden. I will show it to you. And one house for a client and 2 houses, what we call nowadays spec houses, houses to sell. He had the influence of a painter, Dr. Atl, the photographer that became the photographer of all his work, Armando Salas Portugal, that was a landscape photographer. This is what El Pedregal would look at the time, with all the rocks coming from a volcano. And this is the urban design that he worked with a very good urbanist, Carlos Contreras. They worked together with this enormous piece of land that he also became partially the owner of it. And it was business for him to do this extension of the city. Here, where you see Olympic Stadium, here is what the National University will put his their new campus. The entrance was in here to this was the main avenue, the entrance to this huge development with streets that you see are not anymore in the old style of square or rectangular. They are all going up and down with different curves, going with the way the terrain is moving. This is part of the gardens. They're a bit abandoned now, but this is the way the gardens would look. Well, the parks would look, of great photographs of the epoca. And in a sense, to me, here, there is a relation in the result with the things that Roberto Burle Marx was already doing in Brazil. This idea of keeping the spirit of the place, using the local plants, getting this type of ideas. There's not an influence of Barragán in Roberto Burle Marx or of Roberto Burle Marx in Barragán. They are exactly parallel on time, doing more or less the same things. Of course, Barragán didn't keep doing just landscape. Roberto Burle Marx did. This is the show garden. This is a garden that eventually was sold as a lot, but this is the way he proposed, with the rocks showing where there was a hole. He made a fountain that eventually became a pool for the house that was built in here. This is the sales house. This is what he proposed. This was the main entrance with a big chunk of rock in here, with a sculpture by Matthias Geritz. I will come back to Matthias Geritz in a little while. And this is the entrance with showing it was the entrance. They were kind of doors. They were never closed. It was just to give the importance of the entrance to a new and a different place, with new and different houses, with this idea of the solitude of the paintings of the ideas of the time, a plaza that he did he called of the cigarette, that is nothing else than a tank of water up here that you can see from one of the gardens. At the time, other architects were interested also in recuperating this type of architecture. Enrique del Moral did in the Iturbe house and his own house. And these are all doing more or less the same things at the same time. There was also a painter from Guadalajara, Jesus Reyes Ferreira, Chucho called, that he did this type of naive paintings with these colors, very strong and powerful. That was a big influence on Barragán. He mentions his friend Chucho Reyes Ferreira in his Pritzker Prize discourse, and he worked with him. Whenever he would put color in a house, they will discuss it, they will work it together. Also Miguel Covarrubias, a painter and an ethnographist that did a lot of work in Bali, was an influence on him. They were also very good friends. And of course, Barragán had many interested. It's interesting to understand his personality, to look at the books in his library of paintings, of gardens, of African art, of Picasso, Also, the type of music, just folk music of the time or rock music of the time, classical music, jazz. He was interested in knowing and studying and hearing everything. And finally, between 1949 and 50, he builds his own house here in one of the 4 lots where he had done gardens in 1945. This is another house here refurbished next to him. This is his house, and this is his studio that connects interiorly. A very simple street in a very low-key part of town, reminding him of those small places that he loved so much about Guadalajara and Jalisco. But here, he really puts forward this that I would call his new language, that people will call regionalism. Other people will call emotional architecture. This new way of expressing things that he was doing, that also persons like Enrique del Moral was doing. This idea of being at the same time modern but Mexican, keeping the roots, looking at the vernacular, at the lessons of the vernacular, where to close, not to have too much sun, how to open and have window breeze going through. All those lessons are here. And also, in a certain way, a humble house with not color outside at all. It's just the finishing, the gray finishing of concrete going over the bricks. Very close to the outside. He thought the houses should open to the gardens, should close to the street. That's the way we Mexicans are. We're not public. We don't want big windows to the outside. The only big window that is here, it's high and it's of polished glass, so you cannot look at the inside, and very large walls that protect you and give you the idea that the house is a place to protect you. This is the vestibule to the house with the famous stairs going up, a painting by Matthias Geritz, the one that he also worked with him, and he worked very much with Matthias. I will come back to this. The toit terrace, of course, he needed to have a toit terrace. Even if he has a big, beautiful garden, toit terrace was a must. But a toit terrace that has like twitch to neoplasticism. Piet Mondrian is present here with other colors, but he's present here. And the big living room, a room that to me, it's like an homage to Frederick Kiesler in his the endless house. This huge space with small separations. You know there are different other places in there. You know you belong to a big space, but you also have different separations. These are famous stairs. I will come back to them immediately, that go to small private living room here of visiting room for visits. This is the library. Here is the living room, the garden you can see below. The use of this type of wooden support of the ceiling, all this starts coming all together in one language. These stairs are famous, so I had to put Barragán in the stairs, the photo of the stairs of the time, and how he himself, when it was published, turned it around and made a CD out of the photo. You can see how the photo is turned around. For him, architecture was not that sacred or just published to be famous because I'm in the front of the main magazine of the time in Mexico. No, I even make fun of myself. This is this studio. Here are the stairs. I don't think you can see them, just hardly, with the large window, but like I said, with polished glass, so you cannot see each other. In the big main room, where, of course, here is the squares, the 4 squares of colors by Joseph Albers that Albers gave as a present to Barragán. So we start linking everything together, the garden, how the house has a big window to the garden, a big and important garden. The dining room with Chucho Reyes Ferreira, this artist that had to do with the color. And we see how it worked, because up to here, we've seen all the walls are white. It's not that everything is color. Color is important. Yes, it's important in here, and it's important in the dining room with this painting of an archangel by Chucho Reyes, where the pink of the archangel goes to this wall and this to this door, because the door opens, so you cannot open a white door against this. And then I go back and it explains this pink wall in here because the door is in here. So color has a sense, has a place. It's not all just dipped in color. It has a sense. And I think for India that I know and a little bit of Southeast Asia, color is important, it's powerful, but it's not just everything dipped in one color. It has sense, it has contrast, and that's why color is important, because it has contrast. He also worked at the time with Clara Porcet, very important, what we call nowadays industrial designer. She did a wonderful redesign of a vernacular furniture. Here she is sitting in one. She was a good friend of Barragán, and much of this type of furniture that we find in his house was designed by Clara Porcet. Barragán himself designed this other type of furniture, like square things, but chairs and were designed by Clara Porcet. This is the floor plan of the house. I'll pass to. This is again certain type of artisanat that are in Barragán's house, and the studio that was at the beginning with the big piece of furniture to put plans. Here is Barragán drawing in front of here. That's the studio next to the, and then by 1953, he became very good friend of Matthias Geritz, a German that was living in Spain and came to Mexico to be a teacher, first in Guadalajara, then in Mexico City, and did the famous experimental museum El Eco. They became very good friends. They did work several things together. Also, there's the influence of a German architect, Max Seto, that has first moved to United States and worked there with Richard Neutra. He came to Mexico City. He worked in several things with Luis Barragán. This is the house of Max Seto in Jardines del Pedregal, this new expansion that we just talked about. He was the first inhabitant of this compound. He was working in there with Barragán, and he was the first people that decided to make a house and live in there. And it's also this relation that was already in Barragán idea and lectures, the relation to Richard Neutra through Max Seto, the relation, of course, Neutra that worked with Frank Lloyd Wright, and the idea of the richness of the place, the importance of the place. The falling water house is not just a cascade, it's not just water, it's how everything together brings about a special richness. This is what already Barragán was doing, and all this just adds up. With Max Seto, he did in El Pedregal 2 houses for sale. This is one of them. Again, we see the importance of the rock, the big windows, the use of the what he found there as vegetation, the big walls, the color white. And then the Prieto Lopez house, where he started using a bit more color. This was a later addition that is now taken off. So this is the house, how it's just been refurbished with a big light coming in. And strangely enough, people say, no, it's not true. This kind of greenish inside, that is really, to me, a color that comes from Renaissance, from things he had seen in Italy and that he would see later. This is an old photo. This is how it's been refurbished, and it really became huge. Again, that was the idea of Barragán at the time. The outside of the house, and the house that has, in El Pedregal, it's kind of hilly. Part of the house, you enter, this is the street, you enter here, but then the terrain slopes, and this is the lower part, this is the upper part, but as a part that is a street level, and it goes down. Here is the pool. And I show this because this has now not an influence of him, but his influence on somebody else, keep the plan, on Gio Ponti. Gio Ponti, the famous architect and publisher of Domus for a very long time, did the Villa Planchard in Caracas. They had been very good friends in 1952 that Gio Ponti came to Mexico, and he said, I did a house. He wrote to him. He said, because I seen a copy of the letter. I did this house inspired on your house in El Pedregal. Mine is not evolving from the rock. Mine is a bit trying to fly because it's on top of the hill, but it's the same idea. This is the arrival of the house, and then you go down, and the photo doesn't have it, but the pool is down here. So you can see how Barragán pushed other architects like Gio Ponti, that was in Italy doing very good architecture, but got inspired by a house that he saw in Mexico from Luis Barragán that became a good friend of him. There's a lot of correspondence between the both of them. This is the interior of that house. By 1952, again, he goes to Europe. He goes to Helsinki in Finland to a congress of landscape architecture. He didn't like the Nordic countries. Of course, it's hard for a Mexican or for a tropical person to understand or to be really happy in Nordic countries. And he then traveled to the south. He went to France again. He spoke French. He liked it very much. He visited the Giverny Gardens. That's where Monet would live and paint. He went to Italy again. He visited again San Gimignano with the towers. And this will bring me later to another thing. And in January 53, he finally went to Morocco. Just put this photo of Marrakesh to think about it. There's people say, oh no, he went to Morocco before. No, the first time, and this is written on a book, the first time he goes to Morocco is in 1953. He comes, but all that influence from Islamic architecture was already in him. It was already in him through the south of Spain. He did a few other houses, and I don't know how my time is doing, but I'll try to be faster now. Few other houses with all this language or color. You can see everything is white, but the pink is here because it's the pink that comes from inside of the house, the Antonio Galvez house, where the pink is here, and in here, the rest is white or this touch of yellow. where he uses much of local pottery. This is the back part of the house to the garden. Again, some pink, some yellow. The stairs, a Matias Gerrit's painting, or the living room with Pedro Coronel, that is also a very good artist. By 1955, he does a chapel for the Capuchinas Sacramentarias, where he works, especially in the interior of the chapel of this nunnery. He works with Matias Gerrit's, that was doing this type of golden squares. Here is one in the house of Barragán. We just saw another. And also Matias Gerrit did the stained glass windows with yellowish colors that give this golden color to the inside. By 1955, he's doing also a new enlargement of the city in Guadalajara, Jardines del Bosque, where he does a church. And this, again, are the stained glass windows by Matias Gerrit. You can see that in the 50s, he works a lot with Matias Gerrit. Also, he does the garden for a hotel in Acapulco, Pierre Marquez, where the furniture is all by Clara Posset. Again, this relation with other artists, and with Matias Gerrit's, the famous towers or satellite. There has for a while, there was saying, no, the towers are by Matias. Others would say, no, they're only by Barragán. It's really a collaboration. And nowadays we know architects can truly collaborate. And he did collaborate with Matias Gerrit. And he says, and I believe, because Barragán stated it, is the towers of the San Gimignano that inspired me to do this. This is the entrance, again, to an enlargement of the city, Ciudad Satélite, that was designed by architect Mario Pani, and Pani asked him to do something important at the entrance, to mark the entrance to this new enlargement of the city. This is a drawing by Barragán with the idea of maybe having also lights with these towers. By 1958, again, a new enlargement, Las Arboledas, with the red wall. Here he has two interesting fountains. This is El Bebedero, a place to drink for horses. This is a place where many horse stables and horse clubs were placed around. So he used the fountains also to have a place to give water to the horses. He was a big horse rider. He loved that. So for him to do this area was important. Here is another fountain. Here's how it was ruined, but refurbished. And in an access place annex to this called Los Clubes, where he designed this fantastic fountain that has now lost these two trunks called Los Amantes, the lovers. There he also did the stables, the San Cristobal stable for horses with Andrés Casillas. Again, water is very important. And by 1963, he was invited by Louis Kahn to do the garden, according to Louis Kahn, when he invited him, it's in the letter, to do the garden in between the two buildings of the Salk Institute at La Jolla in San Diego, for the University of San Diego. And Barragán came there and said, it's impossible. This is not a place for a garden. The concrete, the buildings are so important and powerful that I'm going to do a patio, an Islamic, an Andalusian patio with water coming through here and going spiritually, because it's below it's something else, but spiritually to the Ocean Pacific. It's a fantastic, again, collaboration, I think, between two great architects. Louis Kahn, that didn't know what to do there, and Barragán, that knew how to do something that was really in connection with Louis Kahn. When one sees this photo, one cannot say it's different. No, it's the same idea, the same mind going together, looking what Barragán said, sensibility, beauty, emotion, all that was important for him. And he was doing it, he was finding it. And then I had to show these photos. I'm sorry. Here is Barragán with his big friend, Ricardo Legorreta, who he was, never really did work together, but he was kind of a counselor, especially at the beginning of Legorreta's career. And I had to show another big architect that we just saw, the very modern house, Juan O'Gorman, with Jawaharlal Nehru, when Nehru and Indira Gandhi here came to visit Mexico in 1952, like it says here. I had to show it because I love this photo, and it's a connection to India that needed to be here for me. He did two more houses, the Gilardi house, with a very small patio. It didn't have a big lot, not a garden, but Barragán accepted to do it because it had this gorgeous tree, jacaranda tree, this color that when it blooms, it's fantastic. This is the entrance to the pool area where he did this great neoplasticism idea with the light coming from here and breaking into the water. This is the sunlight. So you have to catch the time. It's around 11 o'clock in the morning with the blue and the red in here, and the rest is white, but the colors glow with the water. And then the Barbara Meyer house, a simpler house with the toit terrace, also, and the inside very much like Barragán. Finally, he did another big tower, the Big Commerce Beacon in Monterrey, and this was the end, to me, of his work. There was somebody, he had an associate at the last time, that at that time he started doing work. Barragán was already very sick. And then he kept doing work on Barragán's name. For me, here is where Barragán finishes. And like he said, beauty, inspiration, magic, spellbound, enchantment, as well as the concepts of serenity, silence, intimacy, and amazement. All these have nested in my soul. And I think it's true. I think this is what Barragán achieved and what he left to us as his big gift to architecture of the world. Thank you. Well, an hour.
Thank you, Dr. Louise Noelle, for a very fascinating, passionate and insightful presentation into the life of Louis Barragán and the very nuanced elements that went into his life, his journeys, his travels, what he was reading, what he was fascinated with, his childhood. My first, we've just kind of gathered a few of the questions, and I have also kind of combined. But I think the way in which you ended the presentation was wonderful. It was part of also Barragán's acceptance speech for the Pritzker, where he was talking about this idea, and what I think is very reflective or sensitive in this is that he had a very, even the books he brings back that you discussed from Europe, they're not books on form making, or they are books about nature. They are books about garden. They are books about how trees grow. And I think Barragán used to always say, I make the white wall so that the shadow of a tree can rest on my wall, and that was his imagination of the white wall. Could you illuminate us a little more? And I think that was a very fascinating part of your presentation. What did nature or the non-building, if I can call it, I'm giving certain names. What did nature or the void or the fact, those open spaces do to Barragan's architecture? How did he imagine it? Because he has the courtyard, he has the terrace, and somehow that becomes the soul of the house rather than something within the house. Would you feel that, or how would you see his relationship to nature?
Oh, he had a special relation to nature. Ever since he was a boy, he used to spend the vacations in his parents' ranch. That was not a pleasure ranch. It was a working ranch. And he would go there and they would ride horses and go to the town of Mazamitla and would be in nature. And for him, nature was that wonderful place of his childhood. Also, from his childhood, there were these ranch and vernacular houses very much closed, very much private. So all that remains with him. And when he travels, and that I mean mentally, also physically, but mentally, he travels to modern architecture, he travels to artists, he travels to Spain, to many other things. All that remains, adds into his feeling of how being in the nature on horseback or walking or being secure inside of not too open space, it's important. And I think also what modern architecture brought to him is that the outside space and the closed inside could have a connection through a big Corbusian window or a big Bauhaus window. So I think that is there, but he always kept this idea of having a fantastic, secure, fulfilling inside, and also a calming, magical outside space, because outside space is also part of your habitat.
Amazing, because I think you have done that seminal, wonderful essay on the restoration of one of the houses, of the last house that was done. And I was kind of studying the essay and the rigor of the research also that you went into in the making of that. And the fact that few things that came up in the research or in the restoration. One is the manner in which the lava and the rock from the outside comes into the home as a memory of the outside, So the boundary of the house is not to be so sacred that you break inside and outside, but you'll allow the rocks to come in or even break the wall. That was one. And another interesting thing in your research I found was the fact that the architects who were restoring it discovered that there was a very nuanced or maybe a hidden pattern in his structure, of a 4x3 kind of a pattern, which when combined with his structural knowledge, because he was, yes, a structural engineer, but if I'm not mistaken, correct me if there was a system in Mexico at that time where you could do 4 years of civil engineering and then add 1 more year to get an architectural degree. Isn't that, there was some system like that also?
It was something they had in Guadalajara, in his hometown, because in Mexico City, the School of Architecture had been here since the end of the 17th century, with some interruptions due to independence and whatnot, but it was only in Mexico City. And some other architects from his time decided to come and study in Mexico City. He decided to stay at home, like his other colleagues, and studied engineering. He didn't do the extra year. He just did it partially because he had the opportunity to go to Europe. I would have done it also. It was it was a bigger, maybe lesson to go to Europe. Ignacio Diaz Morales did it, and that same school gave a title of architect.
Because
it's not the Mexican way of doing it. It was done in Guadalajara, I don't know, for 10 years, no more. It was just a period.
Sure. What is interesting in your research is also the fact that he's confronting, and like many other modernists or pioneers at that time, he's confronting the modern project with all its industrial, with all its glass and steel and pristine form. At one level is confronting that. I'm sure in Villa Savoy and the other projects by Corbusier, it would have been a very strong confrontation. And at the same time, as you rightly said, he's not so fascinated with the Renaissance or the classical, but more with the vernacular and his own connection with his childhood, right from the sense of color or the sense of making space of a certain kind. And how would you, can you tell us a little more on what do you think his grappling was on combining or trying to deal with these, which apparently look binaries, but to him, maybe because he was not trained in a certain way, he had more freedom in his mind to really combine and make it an experiential, and as you called it, an emotional architect. Could you clarify on this, because this is very interesting?
Yes, I think there are two levels, and exactly from what you said right now. One level is the search for beauty. That's one level. And then the other level, or the other part, is to do things, to do architecture, to build things, to design gardens. And in there, to my mind, modernity and vernacular have paths that can convey, because they are cleaner, simpler solutions. That's what Renaissance, mainly Baroque. Mexico, most of the constructions are this fantastic Baroque outside and inside. Not the 16th century that he liked so much, that are more pure, clean Renaissance. He was much more for clean forms, for not extra Baroque, not extra things. He was much more lean, you might say, in his search for a beauty, for that beauty. There might be other people that find beauty in Baroque, and I also agree with that. And that's why his letters describing the exhibit of 1925 in Paris, he didn't like the buildings that had all the decor. He said, buildings are like l'Esprit Nouveau, can be fantastic. They don't need all those geometrical cladding that are a little bit Baroque. He was going for cleaner. So I think vernacular architecture doesn't have all those things just because they're simpler, maybe poorer, but simpler.
Wonderful. Having said that, there's a connected idea, but I think it's partly already responded to. Barragán was, in a certain sense, the large houses he was really designing for the wealthy. The clients were very wealthy. And it's amazing to see that even though the homes were for the wealthy, they had a simplicity about them, in their presence. And they had something which was trying to touch that essence, they're trying to touch a very kind of a more profound simplicity of living on this planet. It was not, though wealthy, it was not about ornamentation. It was not about overdoing the detail. It was all about a certain kind of monastic simplicity, if one can call it that. And
Yes.
how would you characterize that? You know, were all his houses like that, or what? How do you see that germinate?
Well, I think we have to make clarification. The first houses he mainly did houses in apartment buildings because those are the clients he had. They didn't, nobody asked him for, well, he did church, but not much. And the houses he had in Guadalajara were smaller, simpler houses. Then when he came to Mexico City, the first part, this big chunk of apartment buildings and houses are very simple houses for rent, not big wealthy people houses. And the apartments again are simple. You saw the interior of these apartments for the painters. They're for painters, for artists. They're not rich people. And when those big houses, of course, the Barragán that is known throughout the world, mainly through the photos first of Salas Portugal and then of Yukata Saito from Japan, that are fantastic photos, are of this last part.
Yes, the last 10.
I don't know, there are 10 works. And I have an inventory of 120 buildings by Barragán. So it's the last part. But it's very important, and it's what really made resound in the world. And that he did little by little, thinking much. He didn't do 2 or 3 at the time. He would take time with each of them and really give everything to each of them, changing, thinking, resolving. Those houses, like you said, are monastic. Maybe people, they're not for everybody. Floors are not marble floors. Doors and closets or furniture are not of wonderful woods. They're of simple, the most simple wood you could find. Everything is simple, not big, elegant rugs. They're just, some are just mats, you know, palm mats in some places. Of course, big tables, but not of marble or I don't know what. It's like you said, monastic. And in a way, it is like the big, like I said, monasteries that he liked from the 16th century, huge spaces, but very simple.
Wonderful. Coming to this other point, and I think it may have helped in the restoration of some of his works. In one of your essays, you are discussing not only Barragán, but a larger cultural ecosystem of carpenters, building craftsmen, centuries of building practices. And could you, and the fact that they are carrying a certain very precious indigenous knowledge. And what Barragán probably does is not come with some external concrete technology and start building in pillow tea, but starts a conversation with this indigenous knowledge and building practices which are there around him. Could you elaborate on that? Because I find that fascinating that generally the modern architect has not seen the indigenous culture around that context and has transposed maybe an architecture from Europe or from, and here Barragán is really more open to this kind of a conversation, also of the building craftsmen around.
Yes. Again, I think we can have a double answer, or I would like to make a double answer. On one hand, Barragán is an engineer. And as an engineer, he really knows how to build and how to calculate and how to do well-built things. And this is important to say in an earthquake country like Mexico, where his buildings have never been damaged. They're well built. That's only on him.
Yeah.
But he also understood that a good carpenter, a good mason, he had a favorite worker. I don't know how you say the exact name in English. The one that used to put the plaster and the finishes. The finishing, sometimes they're concrete, more with cement, like the front of his house. This we call them masters.
Yes.
Maestro Pianito.
Here it's also maestro.
And he had this person to work for him because he really liked, and they understood each other. Once, I have to say this, a young architect invited me to see a house he had just built with the influence of Barragán, which is okay. I'm not saying no. He says, and he tells me, then some of a worker passes by and he says, hello. And I say, hello, an elderly worker. And he says, when he passes by, he says, you know, I'm the real inheritor of Barragán. Oh, I say, how? And he said, because that's El Maestro Pianito, the one that used to do the finishes for Barragán. And I said, the only thing I could say, because I couldn't say, you think to be the inheritor is because you have his worker. You are absolutely wrong. Because Barragán had these fantastic people that knew how to do things for him, but they were a team. It's not that you invite somebody to do something and it would be there. And yes, of course he had the person that would do the furniture and the person or the persons. And that's why everything came about so nicely at the end, because he knew how to build and he knew the people that would do what he was in his mind looking to do. And also like working with Chucho Reyes, like to paint a wall, he didn't do like normally everybody does. You put 5 squares of different shades to see which one you like better. No, he would go and paint the whole wall. Then when it was dry, he would go again with Chucho Reyes. They would go and had paint the whole wall. They would go sit in front for a certain time and decided that is what he wanted or not. And if not, repainted the whole wall. That's the way he worked. That's why I say that sometimes with Barragán, it's difficult to know if the original color is the last one when you scratch the wall to do a refurbishment, because you don't know if that one that he himself covered. But in the house with the green, strange light green walls, Domus published it with those colors, with those greens. So that's what make the architects and myself sure that that was the real original color of the house.
Wonderful. If we may end this interview with a very important insight that you have been researching. There are several young architects today who are listening attentively, and they're messaging me on my cell also. Barragán in a way is not history. What lessons does he have for the contemporary architect? If we can end on that note, as he's really a living heritage, he's alive. And so what kind of lessons could we distill from this presentation? There was heritage, there was nature, there was an understanding of modernity, there was a respect for indigenous knowledge, there was a certain gracious simplicity of living, and though it was pristine, it was still gracious and very simple at one level. And there was a connection with experience. It was not trying to be too intellectual or theoretical. It was enjoying the idea of human experience in nature. So what would you say that the contemporary young architect today, or contemporary architecture, we're talking so much about climate change, we're talking so many other things. What would you say we can distill or get inspired by from what Barragán? Just a few thoughts on this.
I think the legacy of Barragán is not the type of architecture or the big pink wall. That is not his legacy. His legacy is the poetry. His legacy is the feelings for architecture, emotional architecture, because the architecture relates to the place. Each place has different materials, different needs, different climate, economic. And I think the architect should take all that into account, but also, to my mind, a young architect should strive to do what Barragán did: search, read, learn, visit physically or visit in videos, see. I think Barragán became like that because he learned a lot, he took a lot in him and distilled it with what for him was beauty, sensibility, peace, all what I read. And that's, I think, what a young architect can do. Take all what he can and bring it back as a service with art, with sensibility to his client.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Louise Noelle Gras, for that amazing and fascinating dialogue. I think we got we got a completely new insight on Barragán because of the unfolding of your presentation and the manner in which you connected it. You showed the disparity. I think we got across his struggle also, where he was trying to look at maybe Corbusier's work and then connect with back to his own childhood. And I think that's something maybe almost all architects are confronted with in practice, where there are childhood memories. It may not be the defined architecture, and then you see a kind of a formalized architecture. And I think, or the client may desire something very different and have very different aspirations. And I think your presentation today was very insightful, fascinating, detailed, and opened up many more new thoughts. Now, I won't say it has completed, it has just begun, because now it has opened up newer, other provocative thinking. And so I do look forward to your visit to India again. I know that we had to be on a digital space because of the pandemic, but I think we enjoy this if we can meet sometime in India and have another presentation.
Or in Mexico.
Or Mexico, yes, and see the Barragán buildings also, Barragán projects. And thank you for your time, and let's be in touch.
Of course. Thank you for having me. I feel honored to be there. I wish I could be present in India, but I feel I'm mentally there, mentally in all that part of the world that is so appealing to me. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Let's be in touch. Yeah.